If I could only own one YieldMax fund, it would hands down be this one. This is YMAG, the YieldMax Magnificent 7 Fund of Option Income ETFs. Now, the reasoning is I think this one has some of the best potential and some of the least risk that we've seen with a lot of the YieldMax funds. Now, if you're a fan of the YieldMax funds, you're in the right place. If you're not, tell me what you think about this one, because I've had mixed feelings with some of the other ones, but I think YMAG could actually have some potential. If you guys are a fan of dividend investing, of it talking about stocks, ETFs, dividends, distributions, anything of the sort, please consider subscribing and liking the video. That helps me out a ton. And if not, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. We're going to jump straight into this video of investing $10,000 into YMAG and tracking how much money it made. For those of you that are familiar with the YieldMax funds, which you guys probably are if you clicked on the video, the YMAG fund is a little bit different. So normally we've seen the YieldMax funds like CONY. It trades option income off of Coinbase stock, and AMZY trades on Amazon, and tsly on Tesla, and so on and so forth. But the difference is YMAG is a compilation of the 7 magnificent ETFs. So this one is a little bit different, and let me just read this. The fund name refers to its strategy of gaining exposure to the common stocks of the 7 companies, which are together commonly referred to as the Magnificent 7, which is Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook or Meta, Microsoft, NVDA, and Tesla. So that right there gives you a little more diversification. Now, what's really, really interesting is this one has a better performance record. It has a lower distribution rate of 41.71%, which is hilarious to say that that's lower. But this one has been reacting better to the market drop than I expected. Now, I was considering doing a video on YieldTY, which is a fund that has over a 100% distribution rate, but I checked the price history and it's down over 40% in just the last 6 months. And so I don't want to be misleading. I think that YMAG probably has a lot more potential, and you're hopefully not going to lose 41% every 6 months of your NAV. And so that's what I want to avoid, is these ones that are dropping in NAV like crazy. But if you guys like YieldTY, or if you like any of the other ones that are dropping really heavily in price, let me know if you're still making money on them. I'm genuinely curious how that goes. If the NAV erosion counteracts the dividends or the distributions, I'm really, really genuinely curious. And I may do a video on it in the end. These are the distribution details. We will go over those in just a second, but I want to cover this fund overview, which is interesting. It's short and to the point. The investment objective is to seek current income. There you go. And so the YieldMax Magnificent 7 Fund of Option Income ETFs is an actively managed exchange-traded fund that seeks to generate current income. We knew that. This is a fund of funds, meaning it primarily invests its assets in shares of other ETFs rather than in securities. So this is where this one would be a little bit higher risk, because you're investing in the other YieldMax ETFs. So if you think the YieldMax ETFs will do good long run, then you're fine. If you don't think they'll do well in the long run, then you might want to rethink that. And I said that it's riskier, but it's really not, because the other funds don't necessarily hold capital in their underlying security anyway. So, it is interesting though. What is crazy with these funds is there is definitely a limit on potential investment gains, meaning you really aren't wanting to trade with an underlying security that's rocketing up in price, because you would be better off just owning the security than you would in getting the distributions. But you want it to be at a steady increase in price over time, which we've talked about on other videos with these YieldMax funds. That's kind of the goal. Now, the net assets is 105.77 million, which is a little bit smaller than I'd like. I wouldn't say it's super low, but still not my favorite. And there is an interesting thing. So the acquired fund fees and expenses is 0.99, and the management fee is 0.29. So you are paying 1.28% gross expense ratio, which is a lot. And so, I mean, 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have $1,000, you're paying $10. So it is something to note. It's something to think about. You are paying, that 1%. So 1.3%. That being said, if a fund is averaging a 42% return, you can probably look past 1.3%. At least I know that I could. But with the NAV erosion, it's still very, very important to track that. So we can see the 1 month performance, they're down 2.5%. The 3 month performance, they're up 11%, just on their NAV, I should say. And their 6 month, they're up 20%. And all of those are a little bit higher on the YMAG market. So this fund doesn't have a ton of history, a little over 6 months, so it's not the newest YieldMax fund, but I do think this one has a ton of potential. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the dividend history and see, or the distribution history, I should say, and we're going to see exactly how much this thing has been paying out in its distributions. So right off the bat for YMAG, we can see a pretty strong distribution history. It started off in the 43 cent, jumped up to 60, all the way up to 68, came back down a little bit to 64 cents where we're at now. I'm really, really curious to see how it pays out this next distribution, because we can see the price has fallen pretty heavily from the 20s, what was it, high 22 area, down to the high 18s, 1880. So that will be kind of telling. If it falls off pretty heavily, if we drop, down to the 40s, I would be not too happy about it. But with how the market's been going, it's definitely something that could happen. Now, Seeking Alpha shows their dividend yield at 19.6%. This is not accurate just because there hasn't been a full year of distributions. Seeking Alpha is just tracking the first 6 months. So what we'll do is we will actually multiply this. We're going to take the $3.60 in distributions that it paid out. We're going to multiply this by 2 because there's 6 months paid, so it would be $7.20. And then we'll divide this number by the current price of the shares, which is $18.78. And then we'll multiply this by 100 to get our percentage, and that gives us about a 38% distribution rate, which is definitely pretty solid. Yeah, the ex-dividend date is the 17th, or it was the 17th. And so the dividend history is pretty solid so far. Monthly dividends, you gotta love the monthly dividends. They're one of my favorite things. I'll be watching. Looks like we have 10 more days roughly until the next ex-dividend date. So I'm curious to see how this thing does pay out. It could do really poorly, as we've seen, or it could kind of just trade sideways. I would rather see it trade sideways, of course. But honestly, I think that this one is shaping up to be a really solid YieldMax fund. Now, in support of showing how YMAG has traded, we are going to show their drip calculator. Now, I like to put these up against the S&P 500, and this is dividendchannel.com, so it's going to show us how they would have traded in comparison to each other. So what's crazy with this is that YMAG has actually outperformed SPY, which is wild to me. Absolutely wild. But since its inception, it is up a total of 10%. And now this is only tracking SPY compared to when YMAG first started trading. But we can see at one point YMAG was up pretty consistently over SPY with dividends reinvested. And with dividends not reinvested as well. It's actually done better not reinvesting the dividends, which I think is really, really interesting. I normally don't like investing in funds that don't do as well with the dividends not reinvested. But it still definitely has some potential. An annualized gain of 20% with not reinvesting dividends compared to the 19.67% reinvesting dividends, which SPY is actually the same. So over this time period, all this is showing is that we have seen a downturn recently. If you had, 5 more years of time with this, it probably wouldn't show the same thing, but it just shows where we're at in the market right now. So take note of that and understand that it is most likely a short-term thing, although I'd be curious to see how this does perform 1 to 3 years out. Now the moment we have all been waiting for, investing $10,000 into YMAG. So I have the return rate just based off what the YieldMax website says they're at currently, 41.71. So the first calculation is usually the easiest. With $10,000 invested, you'd get just under half of that back in the first year of $4,171. Now we'll kick this up and let's just go straight to 5 years. 5 years, by the end of the 5th year, you are now making $16,820 every single year. So the key thing I like to look for, looks like it's in about 3.5 years. You are now making more every year in distributions than your starting amount, which is crazy that you've seen a return like that. Just absolutely wild. So basically, because this is a near 50% return rate, your total returns by the end of the 2nd year are equal to what you invested. So you are making 100% in about 2 years, which is wild. Now, before I get too deep into this, this is definitely speculative at best, because this is based on the return rate staying the same, the distribution yield staying exactly the same, and the price appreciation not going up or down. This is it trading sideways for this entire time period. And although that is extremely, extremely unlikely, it is cool to see how our money can work for us through the power of compound interest. So at 10 years, you are now getting $96,000 a year from dividends alone. And your total return is $316,000, an insane amount of money over just a 10-year time span. 96,000 is more than most people make in a year. So definitely no complaints there. We'll jump straight up to 20 years. We're not going to hold back. At 20 years, you are now making $3.14 million a year off the distribution. Again, if this thing trades perfectly, which it probably won't. But that's an insane number, and your total returns are $10.6 million off a $10,000 investment at this rate. Last but not least, let's say you are 25 years old and you want to retire at 65. You put $10,000 into YMAG and it trades sideways for this long period of time and continues the distribution rate. After 30 years, every single year in dividends, you are going to get $102 million, more than a lot of people make in their lifetimes. Absolutely insane. And your total payout is $348 million over the span of that 30 years. So that shows you the power of these high yielding dividend stocks, these distributions, if they can keep them up, what they will be able to do. And again, we have to see a couple things. We have to see the price appreciation and the NAV stay consistent. If those downtrend long-term and cut out 20% of these returns, it would still make you technically a lot of money, but a lot less than you would make if it were to trade as we are seeing it trade. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what your favorite YieldMax fund is. Do you prefer YMAG over other ones? Do you think it's better to own just ones like CONY or tsly? Let me know what you guys think. I always appreciate feedback in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.